On today's episode of Locked On Wild, injuries have already started to mount as the Wild take on the Jets. Tonight, we'll take a look at the game. We'll get some intel on the Jets. All coming up.
Hey, this is Matt Boldy, and you're listening to Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, we are your team each and every day. And we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. You can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we'll take a look at the injury situation ahead of today's game against the New York Jets, and we'll talk to Connor Hrabchak of Winnipeg Sports Talk to get some intel on Winnipeg heading into the matchup today against the Jets. My name is Seth Toupal, your daily Minnesota Wild insider and credentialed Wild media member, and we knew that Joel Eriksson was not going to play in today's game, but there are a couple of other injuries to take a look at here in this one today. So let's start with the first. We know now that Joel Eriksson broke his nose. That was confirmed by the team today, which I think is a large reason as to why he did not travel with the team today. The plan is for him to be available for Tuesday's game against the St. Louis Blues. I would imagine he'll wear some sort of a extended face shield type thing, but thankfully it doesn't appear to be anything more than that. And so it'll be a one gamer for Joel Eriksson, and then he will be right back in the lineup. The other one, it sounds like Marcus Johansson was banged up as well, and so he will try to go, but we'll wait and see there. Obviously, he had kind of got his knee tangled up with one of the Kraken players and had to be helped off. Came back in, but obviously that is a little sore here heading into today's matchup. The big one, and when this was announced, tried to go back and kind of see if there was anything that gave an indication. Jared Spurgeon will not play tonight. He is day-to-day with a lower body injury. Now, many of you have pointed out over the first couple of games of the season that Spurgeon just didn't look like himself 100%. And this was something that we were a little concerned about heading into the season, is just how do you look? How did Spurgeon look, or how does he look, considering the amount of surgeries that he has had over the last 12 months? Is he going to be able to come back and be as effective as he was a few seasons ago? Now, not necessarily the same injury, but again, I didn't see anything that would warrant a new injury. I didn't see any sort of a play that stood out over the first couple games of the season as something that would have caused an injury. So at this point, from what Michael Russo said, it sounds like he's going to be evaluated, and the Wild will make a determination from there. But as of right now, day to day, and right off the bat, some injury tests for the Minnesota Wild here in the early part of the season. Now, roster-wise, Travis Boyd was called up via emergency loan. Jesper Wallstedt sent down. So 3 games in, and Jesper's been sent down twice already. Travis Boyd will only play tonight if Marcus Johansson is not able to go. Michael Russo confirmed that Liam Ohgren will be in the lineup today. Travis Boyd is a contingency for if Marcus Johansson can't play. I talked about this in the 3 Things recap that is airing probably, you're probably watching this episode shortly after you watch that one. But Travis Boyd is purely a contingency matter for if Marcus Johansson is not able to go. So Liam Ohgren is in the lineup regardless today for Joel Eriksson Ek. Now, how the lines look is going to be really interesting because we saw some really good chemistry with Kirill and Matt Zuccarello and Marco Rossi against the Kraken. That line looked fantastic. So do you keep that together? And do you then go with Matt Boldy and Ryan Hartman? And depending on Marcus Johansson's availability, do you put Liam Ohgren in the lineup there? Remains to be seen because there was no skate before the game today, and so a lot of what we get for lineup predictions are going to be put out there in warmups. So I really have no idea how this is going to play out, because the thing that I am pretty confident in saying is that I feel like Liam Ohgren will play higher up in the lineup than Travis Boyd will. I think if you are in a situation where you put Ryan Hartman on the second line, and if Marcus Johansson is not able to go, maybe Boyd mixes in on the third. This is gonna throw the lineup out of whack more than a little bit here in this game. The other part is, what does the defense look like without Jared Spurgeon? That's probably a little easier to diagnose because obviously Declan Chisholm will slot back in, but I just don't know what to expect from the forward lines in this one. You could also go Kaprizov, Hartman, Zuccarello, Boldy, Rossi, Ohgren as your top six. You could give that a try for this game. I think it is a little easier to just kind of experiment because Joel Eriksson Ek will be back the next game. So you're not trying to find something long-term to fill his shoes. So maybe that is a route that they go as well, and just give that combination a try to start. But honestly, I know it was not something that was planned. I thought John Hynes did a pretty good job of shifting the lines around after Joel Eriksson Ek left the game. I thought he did a pretty good job of mixing some things together, and offensively, the looks were pretty good. So we'll we'll see what happens, but it just, we got 2 games of relative health, and now we are full out into the injury woes. But as we talked about, it feels like this team is better suited to handle injuries this year than they were last year. So I would imagine, again, this is what I'll put out there. We'll see if I'm right. I think Ohgren will take a spot on that second line. Unless Johansson plays, then maybe he plays on the third. If Johansson is out, Ohgren will play in the top 6, and Boyd will play in the bottom 6. That I feel pretty confident that those are the looks that we'll get here in this game. But you're going up against a Winnipeg team that is off to a pretty good start this year, and is a team that is a deep Central Division rival. So this should be interesting to see how the Wild, even shorthanded, how they stack up against one of their Central Division foes. Philip Gustafsson should be in net for this one. I think that was expected going into this back-to-back. And so Gus gives you a better opportunity to keep this game close, I think. And we'll see. It's going to come down to Kaprizov and Boldy being able to keep the offense pushing. That's what it really comes down to. And this is just going to be interesting to see what the combinations look like heading into this game. Now we got some intel for you from Connor Hrabchak of Winnipeg Sports Talk, talking about the start for the Jets, and we'll take a look as to just how much these two teams view each other as rivals over the last couple of seasons. All of that coming up as we finish our pregame edition of Locked On Wild, on the way after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by Hims. Your sex life is important, but your schedule is also on the busy side. You don't have time to go to a doctor's office to get treated for ED. Through Hims, you can get a personalized ED treatment without stepping foot outside your door. The process is 100% online, so there's no need for those uncomfortable doctor's visits, and no insurance is needed, and one low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That's HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/lockedon. The products mentioned are chewable compounded products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get the hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Plus, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So head to FanDuel.com right now to take advantage of this offer. Best part is it doesn't even have to be a winner. You can bet on the Minnesota Wild tonight. If they win, you're covered. If they lose, you're covered. You still get $200 in bonus bets either way. So head to FanDuel.com to take advantage of this great offer today. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And it is time for a dive into today's opponent, the Winnipeg Jets. Connor Hrabchak of Winnipeg Sports Talk, also of the Illegal Curve and Level Flight podcast, here to give us a little intel on one of the Minnesota Wild Central Division opponents. Connor, great to have you here today. And Winnipeg Jets picking up right where they left off last season with some strong performances. They walloped the Edmonton Oilers and were able to pick up an overtime win against Chicago. So couple of wins to start the season. How are things looking so far?
Yeah, thanks for having me. We're planning the parade around here. We're trying to figure out which streets the cup should come down first, and then like which way do you turn, all that fun stuff. But no, it's been a fun start to the year. The Jets had their home opener last night. Really good crowd. The local football CFL team was playing, and they sold out their game as well. So it was a full sports day here in Winnipeg. And the Jets just narrowly squeaked by with Mark Scheifele's 300th goal. Crowd went nuts. It's been a fun start to the year, and then obviously, yeah, the 6-0 win over the Oilers. That was not expected, but definitely welcome.
You know, let's talk about the expectations for the season a little bit, because I know in all the preview work that we did at the Locked On, it seems like the Jets are a trendy pick for one of those teams that maybe takes a little step back this year. Like looking at any of the teams below the Jets in the Central, any sort of conversation about, hey, maybe this team hops up into a playoff spot this year, it seems like any conversation is, well, one of those top four is going to have to take a little bit of a step back. But as of a couple of games, it looks like Winnipeg is just doing the exact same thing. So expectations coming into the year, I would imagine, were just like last year, is that this is going to be one of those, top level teams in the Central.
Yeah, funny enough, like last year, the expectation was exactly what it is this year. Like if you polled Jets fans last year, they probably would have said, yeah, third in the Central, maybe fighting with Colorado, Dallas all year long, narrowly miss out, end up on third in that Central, still a playoff spot. And this year, the expectations are exactly the same. Yeah, Colorado's still a wagon, even though they got walloped by Vegas in their first game, and Dallas is still really good. So the Jets are probably third. But now you have teams behind them that are kind of catching up a little bit in Nashville, Minnesota, a little bit, Utah, undefeated to start their seasons. So the expectation is the same. But it's funny because last year the expectation was the same, and then they were the fourth best team in the NHL. So I do agree that like they're a trendy pick for regression, and I kind of see that line of thinking. Like you had the Vezina Trophy winner last year Is he going to put up a 920 save percentage and save like 30 goals above expected again this year? You lose Brendan Dillon, which I really like Dylan Sandberg, who's stepping a bit into that role. That's an often thing that people bring up, like, oh, they lost Brendan Dillon, so their defense is going to take a hit. It's like, well, it might not take as big of a hit as you might think. I still think this is a playoff team. If they miss the playoffs, I think it would be a major disappointment given where their core is at age-wise and stuff like that. So I still think at worst, there may be like a wild card team, which was a very similar expectation last year, which they obviously blew out of the water.
The Scott Arniel era has begun. Obviously, Rick Bowness retiring in the offseason, but a situation from my point of view seems pretty easy to just keep things going, as Arniel was an assistant for the last couple of seasons under Rick Bowness. So seems like it should have been a pretty easy transition. What have you seen from Arniel at the helm of this Jets team so far?
Yeah, it is very, very similar, if not identical, to how Rick Bowness ran his bench last year. A lot of Jets fans, and rightfully so, wanted to see some changes, maybe some younger players in the lineup. Maybe, Nikolai Ehlers being on the top line is something that Jets fans have been screaming for the past decade, and like they're right. And that's something that hasn't come to fruition yet. He's running the Connor Hrabchak trio, which really struggled last year in about 200 minutes of even strength play. They got shelled in their minutes and got outscored. So they're running that line. They're hoping that they can kind of turn things around. Probably the three best forwards on the Jets, if you want to say it that way. So put them all on one line and see what happens. But Nikolai Ehlers last night had the shot, and then Mark Scheifele was able to bat it in with the empty net. He was the extra attacker. So those two, they've had chemistry their whole career. Jets fans were hoping to see them together, but not yet. And then as for deployment, like last year, the Adam Lowry line often gets referred to as a third line, and like the best third line in hockey. They're the second line. Like they play more than Nikolai Ehlers and Cole Perfetti and all these the secondary soaring line that everyone lists as the second line. They're really the second line. They're playing against Connor McDavid, Connor Bedard, Joel Eriksson and Kirill Kaprizov on Sunday night. I'm sure they'll get that matchup. So they're going to play a lot of minutes. That's really Winnipeg's second line, and that's their identity, is just shutting teams down, winning games 2-1 like they did against the Blackhawks on Friday night. Maybe not 6-0 like they did against the Oilers. I think Stuart Skinner had a lot to do with that. But their identity is remaining exactly the same. Like you said, Arniel stepping in, very easy to just kind of say, do the same thing we did last year. And it'll be interesting to see because the Jets haven't really hit adversity yet. And obviously we're 2 games into the season. We've got a long way to go. But it'll be interesting to see when they do hit adversity, what is the in-game adjustment? What is the lineup adjustment from that point forward? Because Rick Bowness, when he would make changes, a lot of Jets fans would disagree with it, wouldn't like the changes. Is Arniel's change going to be something different? Is it going to be exactly what Bowness did? That's what I'm kind of looking for. But yeah, same old in terms of the coaching staff. The identity is the same. The lineup's the same. Everything's the same.
Obviously, you know what you're going to get from guys like Mark Scheifele, Kyle Connor, but some pleasant surprises last year, particularly Gabe Vardi, who came in the Pierre-Luc Dubois trade, which, side note, the fact that it took 1 season for him to be sent from the Kings to the Washington Capitals, I got to feel like the Jets kind of at how that played out, that contract that the Kings gave him, and the fact that they moved on from him after 1 season. Got to feel like the Jets did the right thing in moving him at that time.
Yeah, I mean, looking back at it, it just keeps getting better and better, this deal for the Jets. And if they're able to sign Vardi long-term, he's a pending RFA, then it's just like an absolute, it already is a home run, but it's even that much. It's like a 500-foot home run, not a 420-foot home run, like it's unbelievable. And yeah, I mean, the Pierre-Luc Dubois era in Winnipeg wasn't great. And I don't really know what the Kings pro scouting department or analytical department or whatever department like kind of vouched for this saw to give him 8 by 8.5. Even Jets fans are like, whoa, like that is top line center money. And this guy has never been a top line center in Winnipeg or performed up to that level. Yes, he was drafted 3 overall and always has that upside as like a big power forward, modern day, like Matthew Tkachuk, like big player with skill, but he's never really shown it and put it all together. And he's a 60-point player, and you're paying $8.5 million. So that contract from the second they made it was interesting, but clearly the Kings were high on him, and that's all it took because they traded away many major assets and gave him that contract. And a lot of other teams wouldn't have done that. But all it takes is one team to be super high on a player and you can get the return that you did. And yeah, Gabriel Vardi, I had a hot take. We had a YouTube video over on the Winnipeg Sports Talk YouTube channel doing all of our hot takes for the season. I had the hot take that he's going to score 40 plus goals. Now, the real hot take there is that he stays healthy for the whole full year because he's never played more than 63 games in a full season. So, and he's 25. So he's been hurt a lot. But I rolled through all the per 60 stats and how he scores more goals on average, or like per 60 than Kyle Connor, who scored 40, and Patrick Laine, who scored 40 twice in a Jets uniform, and all those things. So I'm super, super high on Gabe Vardi this year. He has like 1 assist through the first 2 games, so it's not going too well yet. But hopefully we get one of those like hat trick explosion games on Sunday against the Wild.
You know, and you look at these two teams, and obviously the Jets have, you know, they've got really good depth. And coming into this matchup, I feel like last year, and it was interesting because some Wild players talked about this. The Wild were just they were pretty easy to play against, and you look at all the teams in front, especially Winnipeg, just had their way with the Wild in last season, and so the Wild go out and get Yakov Trenin. They pick up Jakub Lauko. It feels like this is going to be a much closer matchup this year because the Wild have some nice depth, and I don't know how you feel about this, but in terms of like rivals in the division, it kind of feels like the primary rival right now, until Chicago kind of figures their stuff out, kind of feels like the primary rival for the Minnesota Wild is Winnipeg.
Yeah. Well, I would say the primary rival for the Jets is the Wild as well, for sure. You mentioned off the top, I write for Legal Curve. I wrote my takeaways article from last night's home opener. And the final sentence was, there's a lot of storylines to watch for just 2 games into the season. And if you look at the schedule and who's coming up next, there's going to be even more storylines because we know every time these two teams meet, something dirty happens, suspensions are handed out. Like it's a rivalry and it's awesome. Yeah. And it's the geographical component, right? As well. They're really close to one another, about a 6.5 hour drive. So I think that this is the Jets' number 1 rival in the division. If you ask me, 6-7 years ago, I would have said Nashville when they had that playoff series back and forth. And every time they played during the regular season, it was really, really good game. When the Jets first moved back, probably Chicago, because that's when they were winning their cups, right? But right now, it's 100% the Wild, just because of what the games have kind of transpired to over these last, 5 meetings, regular season meetings. Like imagine these two teams meet in the playoffs. That would be amazing. It would just be so awesome to see that rivalry in a playoff format. But I do think that it's their number 1 rival. I'm not sure. I can't speak to the Wild, obviously, but the Jets, 100%. This is their top rival.
I feel like people would say, well, it's Dallas, but I mean, they matched up in the postseason 2 years ago.
Right.
I can't I don't feel like it's, and that might just be the fact that people are, hey, they took the North Stars. Yeah. You look at Colorado, maybe, but I feel like just because of how intense these games have been, Kirill Kaprizov has been injured in a couple of the meetings. There's been fights. There's the whole thing between Ryan Hartman and basically the entire Jets team. There is there's a little something simmering between these two teams that leads to these games being pretty intense.
Absolutely. And if you mentioned that the Wild got tougher to play against this offseason, I mean, then this is just going to escalate even further because the Jets, like I said, are returning basically the exact same team outside of Brendan Dillon, who, does bring that toughness, the physicality, but Adam Lowry will make up for it. He's the captain. He does all that stuff. He fights, he hits. And the Jets do have some toughness at the bottom of their forward core. So I'm really looking forward to this game Sunday. I think it's going to be another classic between these two teams. And classic meaning like 3-2 and just like gross and ugly. Like not like a 6-5 OT like Calgary, Vancouver on the second night of the season there. I'm saying like 3-2, some big hits, something controversial one way or the other. Like I think we're in for a good one on Sunday.
Yeah, it wouldn't be one of these types of games if there wasn't some sort of a goal that was waved off or a goal that was scored, and it's like, oh no, that player is at least 2 feet offside. It's like,
or a 5-minute major review, like like just to see. Yeah.
There will be something that that will transpire in this one for sure. Connor, but before we let you go, just again, I know I mentioned it off the top. Just let everybody know where they can find all of your work. If Wild fans are curious for more on the Jets ahead of the game.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is always a blast. Did it once last year. I'll always come on, preview the biggest rivalry for the Jets in the Central. So this is super fun. Thanks. And yeah, I do YouTube videos for Winnipeg Sports Talk. I go live every Sunday morning at 9 a.m. And myself, Liz Hood, and Jacob Stoller. Jacob Stoller works for Sportsnet. He writes for the Jets. We just talk about the Jets for an hour and a half, basically, just all things Jets. It's once a week, Sunday mornings, live at 9 a.m. And then a bunch of fun videos like that hot takes one. And then I write for Illegal Curve. I do kind of takeaways from every single game. So if Wild fans are curious from a Jets perspective after Sunday's game, go to illegalcurve.com and I'll have my post-game thoughts, usually 3 takeaways on how the Jets played, what happened, and I might have to make it like 7 or 8 takeaways given the fact it's the Wild. And like we said, something crazy is bound to happen. But yeah, that's where people can find me.
Connor, thank you so much for the time here today. Enjoy the game, and
you as well.
We'll see. If I had to equate this to a song, I'd probably have to. I know Taylor Swift is trendy these days. Well, every day. Probably go Bad Blood, but
yeah,
we'll see what happens. We've got more to preview today's game coming up, Wild fans. So stay tuned after the break. That will do it for today's pregame preview edition of Locked On Wilds. We will see how the Wild do today against the Winnipeg Jets. We'll have you covered after the game as well with a live Locked On Wild postcast. So make sure to join us then. We also, of course, have your 3 things recap that'll be ready to rock come tomorrow morning. So join us for today's game. We'll see what happens, considering the lineup that the Wild will be throwing out there, and hopefully it will be a good one. But either way, we got you covered, as we always do here on Locked On Wild. So make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We have new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.